In this next section, we're going to learn how to paint 7 different types of flowers that all have a different shape. I'm starting off with the peony flower, and this flower is made up of a bunch of different shapes, and it may look complex if you see the finished painting or as I'm painting it, but it actually is following kind of a basic pattern of shapes. And I am using just a nice mix of pink with a little bit of yellow added into it to make it lighter pink and peachier. And I'm using my number 6 round brush. And for this project, I actually started off painting all of these on the Fluid brand paper, and I really didn't like the results. So I switched to doing it again on the Arches paper. So if you are trying to emulate these exact results of this section, I do recommend using the Arches paper. And the reason being is for these types of flowers that are sort of using the one-stroke painting method, and then adding deeper color in, it's when you add the color in on the second step that it doesn't blend very well on less expensive paper. So the 100% cotton paper is usually more expensive. And now you can see right here, the areas just stay evenly wet a little bit longer, and then as you drop in that stronger pink color to add some more depth and shading, it just blends and spreads out much nicer. Rather than drawing with like a hard globby line, you get this beautiful bleeding blended effect. So I absolutely loved painting this peony. I can't wait to paint more, and can't wait for the peonies to be back in season. So now you can see the first strokes have some lighter areas and darker, which created our highlights and midtones, and then the second step of dropping in the darker color created our darkest tones. And I'm just doing a simple stem. I won't be doing leaves on the flowers in this section since we're just focusing on flower shapes. And lastly, I just grabbed a little bit of New Gamboge and dropped a little bit in the center to represent some of the stamens in the center of the flower. Next, I am going to show you the anemone flower. Again, this is really popular with watercolor painters. It's a beautiful flower to paint. And I'm using a mix of permanent rose and ultramarine blue, and I also have added in a bit of carbazole violet, and if you don't have that Daniel Smith color, you could use Winsor violet. So with my number 6 brush, I'm basically starting off in the center with a bit of a point, and then pushing my brush down and wiggling it to fan it out and get that thicker, wider petal edge. And one thing with the Arches paper is it is a bit more absorbent, so I have to I did a stroke there and I realized I didn't have enough water, so I just have to add more water to my paint or wet my brush just a little bit more. So it really does depend on what type of paper you're using. Now I have some carbazole violet, and I'm just dropping it in on the base of each petal and the center. And this does look quite dramatic right now, but as it dries and spreads out, it's going to dry lighter and it will spread out and look quite nice. So I'm just adding in the stem, and I just added a little bit of the purple to the green actually to mute it down so that I had a nice harmonious color for this flower. And you can see now the paint in the center is already spreading. And what I did is I dried it with a hairdryer off camera so that I could add the rest of the center of the flower. And it's very important for the second step that the first layer of paint is completely dry. So I mixed carbazole violet with Payne's gray to get a dark purplish black color, and I just stippled it a little bit with my number 6 brush. And now I'm switching to my number 4 brush with my hand very upright on the point. I'm just pulling out a few thin lines that have a bit of a curve to them to represent stamen. And then what I'll do is just add some stippling to the ends of those stamens to represent the anthers. The next flower that I'm going to show you is a tulip. So this type of flower can be really fun to paint. They're quite easy with this technique. So I'm using my number 6 brush, and I've just added a bit of, I think, cobalt violet and permanent rose to the purple mix that I used for the anemone. And I'm creating the main petal right now, and then I'll create some petals around each side of it. But first off, I am dropping some of the more concentrated color at the bottom of the petal, so that'll bleed out. Now I'm adding petals to the sides and to the back. So the two I'm painting there would be the back petals sticking out from the top. And then on the side petals, you only see a little bit of them on the side, and I'm leaving white space. So I'm not painting it right into the original petal, otherwise it'll just look like a big purple blob. And then I'm adding some more deep color to spread and create more depth. And I just dragged out another little petal just because I felt like it looked a little bit too round and uniform. So this is a tulip at the stage where it's opening up and the petals are starting to spread out at the top. The next flower is going to be freesia, and this is a really common flower that you can get from your florist, and it's really fragrant and beautiful. So I've added a little bit more, or a little bit of purple to the pink I used for the peony. And now the trick here is to make sure you leave white space in between your petals. So I'm creating a bit of a row of flowers because the freesia kind of fans out with like a bit of an L shape. And I'm implying that I've got about 4 to 5 petals, and on the front petal of the main flowers it's a little bit shorter because it would be foreshortened in real life, the angle that you are viewing it at. Now I'm dropping in the darker pink, and this is a really beautiful, lovely, probably one of my most favorite parts about doing this style of painting. And again, this is the benefit of using the 100% cotton Arches paper for this project. Now I grabbed some new gamboge, and I'm adding a little bit into the center so it bleeds into the pink, and I'm still making sure I have white space showing. And this is setting up to be quite nice for the flowers. And for this one, it is a little bit important the way you add the stem in because it has a very distinct growth pattern. So looking at real pictures of freesia as well as the reference photo will really help. So it is this L shape, and then the flowers that kind of fan out are connected, and then it goes to little buds at the end. And I like that a little bit of the greens bleeding into the flowers, that's fine. And that's freesia. The next flower that we're going to do is lilac. And lilac can be quite daunting to paint. I once tried to paint it and create every single detail of every single flower, and it was quite time consuming and tedious. And I also didn't really like how it turned out because it looked a little bit over detailed and overworked. So I much rather prefer this style. So again, with my same number 6 brush, I've just added a little bit more ultramarine blue to some of the purple I have mixed up, and then I added a bit more pink to the other puddle of purple. So I have a nice cool and a warm purpley lilac color to work with. And now I'm making little squiggly irregular marks, but I am actually trying to imply a little bit of a flower shape. So I'm making some marks that are kind of going around a central white area. So a very abstracted lilac flower. So each one of these represents the small little lilac flower that makes up the entire cone. And while I'm doing that, I am also making sure that I vary the color. And I'm varying the color by using my cool and warm mix, but also by the same trusty technique I always talk about, which is rinsing my brush just slightly and dabbing it on the paper towel so I get that lighter concentration mixed with the darker concentration of the paint picked up off the palette. So now you can see that kind of taking shape. You've got some warmer colors, some cooler colors, and then also lighter and darker colors. And I really love how this is coming together. It would look beautiful with like a page full of these in a big bouquet of lilacs. So I think I will definitely do that this spring. And so you just want to make sure you don't rush this because there's so many little marks. It's sometimes tempting to just rush through it and get it all down on paper. But even though this is sort of a one-stroke, more impressionistic botanical painting style, I'm still taking my time and creating each mark with intention. And if you need to, you could make a really light pencil outline of the shape of the cone before you start painting to help you kind of create the overall shape of the flower cone without it sort of running away from you. And I'm bringing mine into like a little bit of a rounded finish. And then I'm just going to grab some green for the stem. So you can see that I've got lots of white space in there, but it really does work. Oh, sorry, what I meant is I'm actually just getting some darker purple, and some of the areas of this lilac have already dried. So I'm just going around to the areas that I can see that are still wet and adding a little bit darker color to have it make that beautiful sort of soft bleeded effect. So I've added in the stem there, and I'm moving on to my next flowers, which are the ranunculus. And these are part of the buttercup family and very popular in loose botanical floral painting right now. So I just started with a few marks in the middle, and then I'm keeping them nice and round and sort of tightly stacked together. And this would be one of the flowers facing front on. And now I'm starting another flower, and it's going to be slightly angled to the side. So I'm just making those marks with white space for the center of my flower. Now using the tip and the belly of my brush to create those strokes going around. And it's sort of the same way of creating the leaf, but we're now creating them in circular pattern to represent the flower. So you can see the center of the flower is farther to the back, and I'm painting more of the edge visible closer to the front to make sure that it's slightly angled. Now I've added a little bit of sap green to the center, and again this might look a little bit garish at the beginning, I'm just spreading it out a bit with my brush because usually you can see a bit of green and yellow in the centers of these flowers when they're opening up. Now I'm just making sure that I had my stem centered, and I'm just bringing some curved green lines down for very simple stems, and that's all there is to it for the ranunculus. And the final flowers we're going to paint are daisies. And so there are quite a few different types of flowers that are like what they're called a ray flower. So daisies, rudbeckia, they're all sort of part of the same sunflower and aster flower families. So I started with New Gamboge, and I'm just adding a little bit of quinacridone gold to the bottom of this stippling, and I've made them kind of like little rounded ellipse shapes. And for the petals, what I've done is I've mixed together the French ultramarine with the light red to make my botanical gray color. And I'm starting with the tip of my brush, pressing down and lifting up, same sort of movement, tailored to what I need for these daisy petals. And I'm making the petals on the sides a little bit shorter. Again, this is part of foreshortening. You can see here at a different angle. So the front petals are drooping down a little bit, and then the side petals start to spread out a bit. And then I've just added a bit of the stronger botanical gray to the areas of the petals closest to the center of the flower. And now I've started on the second daisy, and I've overlapped these petals on purpose. Again, this will happen in real life, so it looks a little bit more natural if you do this in a composition of a painting. You can really see how I press down and sort of pull up my brush to create these petals. So once again, practice is the way to go. Use your scrap piece of paper until you're happy with what you're producing with your brush, and then you can move on to your final painting. So I'm dropping in that darker gray, and definitely helpful for this type of flower because it is challenging to create a white flower on white paper, and this is the way to get around it, to use a really light gray. Now I'm creating the stems and making sure that I show the top portion attaching to the center of the daisy. And just bringing that down a little bit farther, and then I will add in the second stem, and that is all there is to it. So I hope you enjoyed this section. I had a lot of fun creating these. And now we're going to be moving on to the final 3 projects, and I really hope that you enjoy the rest of the course.